Oh, Marilyn,
Yes, I'm much happier though. I'm very pleased.
For more than 60 years, Hollywood has clung to a lie. That Marilyn Monroe, one of the most iconic, adored, and misunderstood women of the 20th century, simply took her own life and vanished. But behind the official reports and polished headlines is a story far more twisted. A story involving secret affairs with the most powerful family in American politics. Missing evidence, a staged crime scene, and a diary that may have been erased from existence. Marilyn wasn't just a movie star, she was a threat, and when she stopped playing by the rules, the system that created her may have decided to shut her down for good. Today, the secrets surrounding her final hours are finally resurfacing. And the truth? It's darker than anyone ever imagined.
I would like to say that I'm fully confident that in the end my husband will win this case.
Before the world knew her as Marilyn Monroe, the dazzling icon with the megawatt smile, she was just Norma Jean Mortensen. And from the moment she was born on June 1st, 1926 in Los Angeles, her life was marked not by fame, but by abandonment. Her birth certificate had no father listed. Her mother, Gladys, suffered from severe mental health issues and was in and out of psychiatric hospitals. That left baby Norma Jean without a stable home or family to call her own. By the time she was 9, she had already lived in multiple foster homes and had been placed in an orphanage. While other children played in backyards and hugged their parents goodnight, Norma Jean was learning how to survive a world that seemed to have no place for her. Every new home came with a new set of strangers, new rules and new risks, including abuse that would leave deep psychological scars she never fully escaped.
And I saw the most beautiful pictures I'd ever seen. And I said I'd like for this photographer to photograph me.
Trust for her was never a guarantee. Love always came with conditions. And safety? That was just an illusion. From 1935 to 1942, her childhood passed in fragments, temporary addresses, short-lived attachments, and constant emotional whiplash. One day she'd be in a foster home, the next back in the orphanage. The instability taught her something early. If she was going to survive, she couldn't rely on anyone. She had to smile when she wanted to cry, pretend everything was okay when it wasn't. That emotional armor crafted in childhood would become both her strength and her curse. By age 16, the state was preparing to move her again, and Norma Jean knew exactly what that meant. More strangers, more instability, more loneliness. So she made a choice, a strategic one. She married her 21-year-old neighbor James Doherty. Not for love, not for passion, but for escape. Marriage was her only ticket out of the system. And so, at an age when most teenagers are just figuring out who they are, Norma Jean became a wife, not out of romance, but out of survival. But what she couldn't have known then was that survival would soon turn into transformation, and the factory worker hiding behind a borrowed last name would soon be discovered in the most unexpected way. In 1944, while most of America was focused on winning World War II, Norma Jean was just trying to hold her life together. With her husband James Doherty deployed in the Merchant Marines, she found work at the Radioplane Munitions Factory in Van Nuys, California. It was loud, repetitive, and physically demanding. But for Norma Jean, it was more than a paycheck. It was independence. For the first time in her life, she wasn't relying on anyone else. What she didn't know was that everything was about to change. One afternoon, a military photographer named David Conover arrived at the factory to take morale-boosting photos of women supporting the war effort. Most of the workers faded into the background. But not Norma Jean. There was something about her, something in the way she carried herself, the way her eyes lit up for the camera. Conover saw it instantly. He took her picture, and that single moment turned into a spark that would ignite an entire legend. Within weeks, photographers were calling. Modeling agencies reached out. She posed for cheesecake pinups, magazine covers, and calendars, and she wasn't just photogenic, she was magnetic. There was a softness to her that made people lean in, a sadness that felt familiar, and a subtle kind of power that made even the most polished shots feel alive. By 1945, she'd dyed her hair platinum blonde, signed with the Blue Book modeling agency, and was posing for everything from military ads to men's magazines. She knew how to work the camera, but more importantly, she understood how to work the moment. Behind every smile and carefully placed hand was a girl who had once been invisible. The camera gave her something she'd never had before: attention that felt like approval, validation that felt like safety. But that craving would come with consequences. As her modeling career took off, she began distancing herself from the life she had left behind. Her marriage to James, built on survival, couldn't withstand the pull of ambition. They divorced in 1946. By then, Norma Jean had already caught the eye of Hollywood executives. The once-forgotten foster kid was now on the brink of stardom, but fame would come at a price. Because in order to truly become Marilyn Monroe, Norma Jean would have to disappear. In 1946, the transformation became official. Norma Jean Mortensen, foster kid, factory worker, model, signed her first contract with 20th Century Fox. But before she could become a star, she needed a name Hollywood could sell. Marilyn Monroe was born. Marilyn came from a Broadway beauty of the 1920s. Monroe was her mother's maiden name. And just like that, Norma Jean, the insecure, wounded girl who had spent her childhood being passed from home to home, was buried under a new identity. The name change was more than cosmetic. It marked the beginning of a lifelong split between who she was and who the world wanted her to be. On the surface, she was stepping into her dreams. But behind the scenes, she was being molded, reshaped by the studio system into a product, a brand, a fantasy. They changed her hair, her voice, her smile. Everything had to be perfected, polished, and packaged. Her early film roles were small. She played waitresses, secretaries, and background beauties, characters with little depth but plenty of curves. These were stepping stones, but they were also signals. The studio saw what the camera saw. A woman who lit up the screen not for her words but for her body. Still, she studied. She watched how seasoned actors worked. She absorbed the language of the set. She wasn't content with just being pretty. She wanted to be good, but Hollywood didn't care about that. As her screen presence grew, so did the pressure to fit the dumb blonde mold. Directors gave her lines dripping with innuendo. Posters framed her like a centerfold. And the public bought into the illusion, not knowing how much it cost her to keep the act alive. In 1950, she had her first real breakthrough in The Asphalt Jungle, a gritty crime drama where, even with limited screen time, she left a mark. Critics noticed. Audiences noticed. Suddenly, she wasn't just decoration. She had presence. That same year, she appeared in All About Eve, brushing shoulders with Hollywood royalty. The transformation was accelerating, and there was no turning back. But even as Marilyn Monroe rose, Norma Jean remained trapped inside. She craved respect but was handed scripts that treated her like a punchline. She longed for substance, but studios only wanted sparkle. The world was falling in love with an illusion, and Marilyn, who had built her fame on the idea of being wanted, was starting to feel more invisible than ever. By the early 1950s, Marilyn Monroe was everywhere, on magazine covers, theater marquees, and the lips of millions who had fallen under her spell. Films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire didn't just make her a star, they made her a global sensation. She was the ultimate blonde bombshell, the dream girl of an entire generation. But for Marilyn, success came with strings. The more adored she became, the more imprisoned she felt. Every laugh, every pose, every wink on screen was a performance, one that masked the storm brewing beneath. Fame didn't silence her childhood trauma. It just buried it deeper, under a mountain of expectations and studio contracts. Behind the smiles and sequin dresses, Marilyn was unraveling. The anxiety that had plagued her since childhood returned with a vengeance. She suffered from chronic insomnia, frequent panic attacks, and waves of depression that left her drained and disoriented. Sleep became impossible without pills. Energy required stimulants. Hollywood handed out prescriptions like candy, and Marilyn, like many stars of her era, became dependent. Barbiturates to sleep, amphetamines to wake up, then more pills to take the edge off. What began as a coping mechanism quickly spiraled into a dangerous cycle. But no one in the studio system seemed concerned with her well-being. As long as she showed up looking radiant, her pain stayed off the books. Yet even that began to slip. She started showing up late to shoots, forgetting lines, freezing on camera. Some labeled her a diva. Others whispered about her being difficult. But what they didn't see was a woman buckling under the weight of a double life. Marilyn wanted more than fame. She wanted respect. She wanted to be seen as more than a sex symbol, more than a studio puppet. She studied acting seriously, read philosophy, and took her craft to heart. But no matter how hard she worked, she kept getting typecast. The studios didn't want a serious Marilyn. They wanted the fantasy, the flirt, the ditz, the goddess in heels. And every time she pushed back, the walls closed in tighter. Her battle with 20th Century Fox intensified. She demanded better roles, fair pay, and creative control. They responded by suspending her, replacing her, and punishing her for speaking out. But Marilyn didn't stay silent. She walked off sets, rejected scripts, refused to play dumb. These weren't tantrums, they were protests, acts of defiance from a woman who had spent her life being told to smile and stay quiet. While Marilyn's public life shimmered with fame, her private life told a much darker story, one of heartbreak, emotional chaos, and an endless search for something that always seemed out of reach: love, stability, safety. She chased those things with the same determination she brought to the screen, but no matter how close she got, they always slipped away. Her 3 marriages weren't red carpet fairy tales. They were war zones of clashing needs, broken communication, and unhealed wounds. Each began with the hope of finally being seen for who she really was. Each ended with a deeper sense of abandonment. Her marriage to baseball legend Joe DiMaggio was supposed to be different. They were both American icons. On paper, the perfect couple. But beneath the surface, their relationship was unraveling from the start. Joe was conservative, private, and deeply uncomfortable with Marilyn's image as a sex symbol. Her fame wasn't a point of pride, it was a threat. He wanted a wife, not a movie star. He reportedly became jealous, possessive, even violent. The final straw came during the infamous filming of The 7-Year Itch, the scene where her white dress blows above a subway grate in front of a crowd. Joe was furious, not just because of the scene, but because of the cheering men watching it happen. That night reportedly ended in a violent argument, and just 9 months after they said "I do," Marilyn filed for divorce, citing mental cruelty. Her next marriage, to Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Arthur Miller, seemed like a turning point. Here was a man of intellect, someone who valued art, ideas, and depth. Marilyn thought she had finally found a partner who saw her beyond the persona. But again, the gap between fantasy and reality proved impossible to bridge. Arthur's emotional distance clashed with Marilyn's desperate need for connection. He was analytical and detached. She was sensitive and wounded. She read his journal one day and saw that he had written he was disappointed in her. It shattered her. Another man who had looked at Marilyn Monroe and expected someone she could never be. With every failed relationship, the emotional damage deepened. She longed for love that was unconditional, but all she found was judgment, pressure, and silence. As her heart continued to break, the addiction worsened. Pills numbed the pain. Alcohol dulled the loneliness. But nothing truly filled the void left by a lifetime of being passed over. As Marilyn's career teetered and her emotional health spiraled, another storyline was quietly unfolding. One that would take her from troubled starlet to dangerous liability in the eyes of some of the most powerful men in America. The rumor? Marilyn had been romantically involved with President John F. Kennedy and possibly his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. To the public, it sounded like gossip. But behind closed doors, there were questions no one dared to answer. What did she know? Who had she confided in? and had her relationships with the Kennedys crossed a line too dangerous to ignore. According to friends, staff, and biographers, Marilyn's connection with JFK began in the early 1960s. Reports claim she was emotionally involved, some even say obsessed. She saw the president as more than a lover. To her, he was validation, a man of power who finally made her feel important, seen, even loved. But JFK's world was built on discretion and denial. Marilyn's vulnerability didn't fit into that equation. When their rumored affair fizzled, some say she turned to Bobby Kennedy for comfort, only to find herself discarded once again. To a woman already wrestling with abandonment, it was a devastating betrayal. Her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, reportedly told close associates that Marilyn had become emotionally dependent on Robert Kennedy in her final weeks. She was unraveling and feeling used. That emotional volatility, combined with her fame, made her a ticking time bomb. She was rumored to be keeping a diary, filled with sensitive details about her life, her lovers, and perhaps even secrets she had been told in confidence. If true, that diary posed a major threat. Political careers, reputations, and even national security could have been on the line. Surveillance rumors only added fuel to the fire. Some believe her phone was tapped. Others claim she was being monitored by the FBI or CIA, concerned that she might reveal information that wasn't meant for public ears. She had openly supported civil rights, made controversial friends, and had access to the most powerful family in America. In an era where image was everything and secrets were currency, Marilyn knew too much and trusted too easily. Her loneliness, her craving for connection, and her loose-lipped honesty suddenly made her dangerous. Friends later recalled phone calls where Marilyn sounded agitated, even frightened. She had reportedly said things like, "Say goodbye to the president," and "They're going to find me dead." Whether those were cries for help, cryptic warnings, or something else entirely, no one can say for sure. But one thing is clear. Marilyn's final days were consumed by fear, confusion, and a growing sense that she had been abandoned by everyone who once claimed to care. By the time she began working on her final film, Something's Got to Give, in 1962, Marilyn was a shell of the star they once promoted. She was sick, emotionally drained, and struggling just to function. The studio fired her mid-production, blaming her for delays and cost overruns. They painted her as unstable, ungrateful, even crazy. But no one asked how many sleepless nights she had endured, how many pills it took just to get her out of bed, or how many times she had tried to speak up, only to be silenced by a contract, a headline, or a man in a suit. On August 5, 1962, the world woke up to a headline that stunned millions. Marilyn Monroe had been found dead in her Brentwood home at just 36 years old. The official cause? A probable by barbiturate overdose. But almost immediately, something didn't sit right. The story the public was fed felt too neat, too fast, too convenient. And the more people looked, the more questions surfaced. Questions that remain unanswered to this day. First, the timeline didn't add up. According to housekeeper Eunice Murray, she noticed Marilyn's bedroom light still on late at night and found the door locked. She said she became concerned and eventually called Dr. Greenson, who broke in and discovered Marilyn's lifeless body. But in later interviews, Murray changed key details, first saying it was early morning, then suggesting it had all happened the night before. In a 1985 BBC interview, she blurted out, "Why at my age do I still have to cover this thing?" That single sentence reignited the theory that something about the official story was being deliberately hidden. Then came the forensic oddities. Marilyn's autopsy revealed lethal amounts of pentobarbital and chloral hydrate in her system, enough to kill her several times over. But here's what baffled investigators. There were no pill remnants found in her stomach. If she had swallowed that much medication, why wasn't there any physical evidence? Some experts proposed the drugs were administered through an enema or injection, methods that wouldn't leave residue. But if that was the case, who gave it to her? And why was there no mention of it in the coroner's report? Things only got murkier. Sergeant Jack Clemens, the first LAPD officer on the scene, said he immediately felt the room looked staged. He claimed Eunice Murray was washing bed linens when he arrived, a bizarre activity given the circumstances. He also said those present, including Dr. Greenson and Marilyn's publicist, seemed rehearsed, as if they were trying to stick to a script. Years later, Clemens went on record saying he did not believe it was. Even the small details didn't make sense. There were reports of Robert Kennedy being in Los Angeles that weekend, despite official statements placing him elsewhere. Some witnesses claimed he visited Marilyn's house that night. Others said he was seen leaving in a rush. Whether true or not, these sightings only added to the growing belief that something darker had occurred. And then there was the infamous Red Diary, a rumored journal Marilyn supposedly kept, filled with sensitive notes about the Kennedys, studio heads, and private conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. According to some, that diary vanished the night she died, never seen again. Was it stolen, destroyed, or did it ever really exist? No one knows. But the idea of it was enough to terrify people in high places. The Los Angeles District Attorney reopened the case in 1982, then again in 1992, citing persistent public interest and new claims. But both times the official verdict remained unchanged. No evidence of foul play. Still, even the DA's own report admitted the original investigation was sloppy, inconsistent, and possibly incomplete. So what really happened that night? Was it an overdose, taken in despair, a staged scene to cover up a deeper scandal, or something far more sinister, an intentional silencing of a woman who knew too much? We may never know for certain, but the shadows around Marilyn Monroe's death have never lifted, and the more light we shine on them, the darker they seem to get. More than 6 decades have passed since Marilyn Monroe's death, and yet the world still isn't done asking questions. That alone says everything. Most stars fade with time, but Marilyn, she lingers. In magazine covers, in TikTok edits, in conspiracy threads and courtroom whispers, she was the girl who came from nothing, the woman everyone wanted but no one truly knew. Her face sold movies, perfume, and dreams, but behind the platinum hair and red lips was a soul begging to be heard. Marilyn wasn't destroyed by fame alone. She was undone by a system that chewed her up and labeled her difficult the moment she wanted something more than to smile on cue. Her trauma wasn't just a tragic footnote. It was the blueprint for every decision she made, from the roles she accepted, to the men she loved, to the pills she took to sleep. She was trying to build a life from broken pieces. But in the end, those cracks were everywhere, too deep, too wide, too painful to hide. Her final days remain clouded in doubt. The rumors haven't gone away. If anything, they've grown louder. Political cover-ups, missing evidence, wiretaps, affairs that could ruin reputations, a red diary that may or may not have existed. Maybe the truth was buried with her. Or maybe, just maybe, someone made sure it stayed buried. What we know for certain is this: Marilyn Monroe was not weak. She was not a cliché. And she was never truly understood in her own time. She fought for creative control when women weren't allowed to. She demanded respect when the world only saw sex appeal. And she paid the price for challenging the narrative, for wanting more, for refusing to just disappear quietly. Today, her story isn't just about Hollywood or tragedy. It's about the cost of being underestimated, of being seen as an icon before being seen as a person, of what happens when the most photographed woman in the world dies alone with more questions than answers. Marilyn Monroe left behind more than a legacy. She left behind a warning about power, about silence, and about what it means to be consumed by the very spotlight that made you. And maybe that's the real reason we can't look away. Because Marilyn didn't just die mysteriously, she lived in mystery. And in doing so, she became something Hollywood never expected: immortal.